This mountain in southwestern France may hold the clue to a great unsolved mystery. Two Englishmen now believe they have unraveled a 1,000-year-old conspiracy.
This marks the culmination of 3 years hard research and a combination of mathematical and historical investigation.
The knowledge that this site contains is dangerous knowledge.
It is a place of unique significance. This one precise location on the side of this mountain. It is sacred and it is fabulous.
This story began 100 years ago when a new priest arrived at the little village of Rennes-le-Château in the foothills of the Pyrenees. The priest's name was Bérenger Saunière. He lived in the tumble-down presbytery on a stipend of £6 a year. His devoted housekeeper was a young girl from the village called Marie de Narnaud. But the church was in sad disrepair, so the new priest began to oversee its restoration. That's when Antoine Captier's great-grandfather saw something glinting in a pile of builder's rubble.
He was Saunière's bell ringer, and one night, as he was coming down from the bell tower, he saw something glinting from a pillar at the foot of the stairs. The top of the pillar had come off, and inside it he noticed a glass phial. He took it out, and in it was a scrap of paper, rolled up. He quickly went to the priest to give him what he had found.
Nobody knows what was on that scrap of paper, but what the priest did next was excavate the aisle, the nave, and the transept of his church.
Next, Saunière began to dig in the cemetery. Here he was much more cautious. He dug at night, hoping not to be seen by the villagers, and he was helped by his housekeeper, Marie de Narnaud.
One of the graves he disturbed was that of a local aristocrat, the Lady Haute-Poule, Countess of Blanchefort. Saunière's own diary records the event. September the 21st, 1891, discovery of a tomb. Then Saunière abruptly stopped all restoration work. He hastened to the cathedral town of Carcassonne, where his diary records a meeting with the bishop's deputy. Then just one word: secret. Suddenly, the poor priest had money to spend. Saunière redecorated the entire interior of his church in the gaudy taste of late 19th century Catholicism. On the edge of the village, he built a mock medieval tower and stocked it with expensive books. His builders constructed a promenade with a glass house where he kept a menagerie of exotic pets. The priest and his housekeeper posed in front of a handsome new villa with formal gardens. Saunière was rumored to live the life of a sybarite, drinking fine wines and dining on ducks that had been fattened with sponge fingers. Towards the end of his life, Saunière's bishop demanded to know where the money was coming from. He even suspended Saunière for a while. But Saunière never did account for the 200,000 gold francs, worth £500,000 today, he was said to have spent. He died in 1917, taking his secret with him. He left everything to Marie de Narnaud, who lived alone in the villa until a family called Corbu came to take care of her in her old age.
In 1946, when I was 7, I would often see Marie. She was tiny, about 5 feet tall, dressed in black and covered in wrinkles. She smiled a lot and used to give us children sweets and postcards. When we were little, Marie de Narnaud often told us, "You're walking on gold. You could feed the village for 100 years and there'd still be some left over." She also told my father, who had money worries, "Monsieur Corbu, don't worry. One day you'll have more money than you'll ever spend." So we thought that perhaps on her deathbed she would reveal her secret. But just before she died, she had a stroke which left her unable to speak, and so she was never able to tell my father anything.
They buried her in 1953 next to the man she called "my dear departed."
Saunière did find a small treasure in his church. He did it in front of witnesses, all of whom I have interviewed. He found 3 things which I saw myself: a collection of old coins, 2 very beautiful Visigothic jewels, a necklace and a bracelet, and a 13th century gold chalice. The discovery was not insignificant, but it certainly doesn't explain how he spent $1.5 million francs in 20 years.
Gérard de Sède found his explanation in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, where someone had deposited a curious collection of typescripts and photocopies called the Secret Dossier. Never authenticated by the library and written under pseudonyms, the Secret Dossier contained genealogies, a quasi-Masonic charter, and sketches of the aristocrat's tomb which Saunière had dug up. This led de Sède to his most exciting discovery: 2 parchments, which purported to be the ones found by Saunière's bell ringer. What's more, they contained secret messages, written in code.
When I submitted the cryptographic documents that I found to officials at the cipher office, they confirmed that the documents were encoded. However, it hasn't really got us anywhere, because we ended up with a message that's completely nonsensical.
Shepherdess, no temptation. Poussin, Teniers, hold the key. Peace 681. By the cross and this horse of God, I complete this demon guardian at noon. Blue apples. At this point, Henry Lincoln makes his entrance. His 3 BBC documentaries and a best-selling book called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail made the mystery of Rennes-le-Château world famous. So much so that signs still ban treasure hunters from digging up any more of the village.
These village streets are now very familiar to me, but each time I walk the last few yards to the church, I find myself uncomfortably aware of that extraordinary and daunting inscription above the door: Terribilis est locus iste. This place is terrible.
At first, Lincoln believed Saunière had discovered buried treasure, and that clues to that treasure were to be found in the 2 parchments with their coded messages.
Perhaps if we could read the secret messages, we too could be led to the source of Saunière's wealth. The first message, in fact, is very easy to find.
It's found quite simply by identifying those letters which are raised higher than the rest of the text and reading them off in sequence. It says, "This treasure belongs to Dagobert II, king, and to Zion, and he is there dead."
The coded message in the second parchment began, "Shepherdess, no temptation. Poussin holds the key." Lincoln wondered if Poussin was the artist, and if the shepherdess was an allusion to Poussin's best-known painting, the shepherds of Arcadia.
The obvious relevance of the painting led me to undertake a detailed examination of it, and I found what seemed to me to be a curious and rigid geometry. I sought the guidance of Professor Christopher Cornford of the Royal College of Art, who has made a special study of the geometry of paintings.
As I worked on the painting, it did seem to me to become evident that there was present in the geometry of it, somewhere in this area, the presence of what could be a regular pentagon and the angles of the pentagon.
The next step was to join the opposite points of the pentagon. This makes a 5-pointed star. What could this imply? In fact, what is the significance of the pentacle?
An ancient symbol of the occult, the pentacle seemed to indicate something of magical significance.
As a result of his documentaries for the BBC, Lincoln had tremendous authority, and when he came to offer a book to the publishing community, there was tremendous excitement. I remember it very well. The agent was asking enormous amounts of money. We were asked to read the typescript in conditions of great secrecy, sealed rooms, security guards, confidentiality documents, and so on. Lincoln's book has been a huge success. It's been translated all over the world. It's been reprinted many times, and it has almost created a market for this kind of material in the public mind. Umberto Eco, whose Foucault's Pendulum is a kind of spoof of it, is a kind of tribute, a kind of homage to the success of that book. And it shows, I think, that both at the high end and at the low end, all kinds of people can get drawn into this story, whether you're Umberto Eco or an amateur historian. And there's no doubt that the publishers are ever eager to feed that market.
Tomb of God, the latest book about the mystery, is published by Little Brown, who paid its authors an advance of £300,000. A former civil engineer, this is Paul Schellenberger's first book. Like millions of others, Schellenberger was fascinated by Lincoln's TV programs and has read his books. He was just browsing when he came across The Holy Place, in which Lincoln argues that the presence of occult geometry shows that the real mystery is not one of buried treasure, but of religious or mystical significance.
The particular aspect of this puzzle which appealed to me with my particular background in engineering and my general interests was that the geometry that had been chosen represented something that was rigorous.
In other words, geometry is an exact discipline. You are either right or wrong.
Looking at the lines that Henry Lincoln drew on parchment 1, it's quite clear that 2 of the lines he's drawn in there are justifiable.
But the more he studied the book, the more he questioned Lincoln's geometry.
There are various things that have been stated in the books that have been published on this. Particularly I'm thinking of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, and I really needed somebody to help me with the various avenues that needed to be investigated.
Schellenberger's partner is a Bisley crack shot with a passion for shooting old Winchesters. As a professional diver, Richard Andrews has worked as an underwater archaeologist.
My role has been to look into the historical aspect of the story and to see if there are any connections or any links that might be relevant to our discovery. It seems fairly apparent to us that Saunier had stumbled on a secret.
To keep their own findings secret, they avoided academics and independent researchers like Henry Lincoln.
We were to find that our investigation would not rest on Saunier alone. Concealed in the parchments he had allegedly found were a number of clues, and these clues started us off on a completely new trail.
While Andrews checked for historical accuracy, Schellenberger tried to make sense of the parchments with their secret codes and occult geometry.
Well, I started with the work that Henry Lincoln had done, but only took it a certain distance. And I then noticed that there was an angle between 2 of the lines, which is 60 degrees. This suggests the equilateral triangle. and I found the left-hand line, which actually runs at 75 degrees to the horizontal, passes between a whole series of O's.
In the second parchment, he detected a tilted square and began to wonder if they were opposite sides of the same page.
Paul's next move was to place the parchments onto transparency with his overlays and show them back to back.
There appeared to be a precise geometric relationship between the triangle and the square on Saunier's parchments.
The more we've investigated the story and the more discoveries we've made, the more of the Saunier story we feel inclined to believe.
The story goes that soon after he found the parchments, Saunier took them to Paris to be examined by experts.
The trip that Saunier made to Paris also took him to the Louvre, where he is said to have obtained copies of 3 paintings.
He's reported to have returned to Rennes Château with a copy of Poussin's Les Bergers d'Arcadie, a painting by David Teniers the Younger, and a portrait of Pope Celestine V.
The reasons one is looking at this particular painting by Poussin is that the coded message, the riddle, refers to Poussin and the other painter, Teniers. The triangle, the equilateral triangle in parchment 1, is tilted over at a strange angle of 75 degrees to the horizontal. The shepherd on the extreme left of the painting is holding his staff at exactly that angle. That is the first indication that the geometry that you find in the Poussin painting is the same as in the parchments.
And the same geometry appeared to be present in all 3 paintings. Schellenberger began to study maps of the region. It occurred to him that the coded message might be indicating points on the landscape.
It's intelligible, but it's still apparently meaningless. The translation that's normally given is shepherdess, no temptation, Poussin and Teniers guard the key, peace, 681, by the cross and this horse of God, I complete, this demon guardian, at midday, blue apples. The whole of this riddle describes particular geographic locations, and when you go round it, you get a square.
A perfect square, just like the square on the parchment and in the paintings, and tilted at 75 degrees. To test his theory on the ground, Andrews and Schellenberger went to France. They located the shepherdess of the riddle at a strange rock formation known as the Devil's Armchair.
Bergère, well, the most obvious translation for this, of course, is shepherdess, which is what it's always been translated as. But there are other meanings for bergère, and the relevant one is armchair, and it's a term which is still used in the antique trade.
The riddle also contained the enigmatic numbers 681.
681 is actually a spot height on the map at a place called Col de las Pinas. The intriguing thing about this is there's a very nice sign saying Col de las Pinas 680.
But 19th century maps give the height as 681.
Well, we found the cross by the side of the railway line.
But the really interesting thing about the cross is that it has dates on it. One is 1876. The other year is 1801.
When you subtract one from another, one is left with the number 75.
75 degrees is the angle which is found in the parchments and in the paintings.
A cheval de Dieu.
Cheval de Dieu is the railway, or the railway line, which is linked to the cross.
The obvious translation is a horse of God, but in fact Cheval de Dieu, if you look that up in the Grand Larousse dictionary of the 19th century edition, you find that it's actually a slang phrase or argot as the French would put it, for a cricket, Grail in French. If you look that up, it doesn't just mean cricket. It's actually the square supports for something like a railway bridge.
A chance encounter with a local peasant taught them that pomme bleue, or blue apples, is local slang for grapes.
We've now arrived in Esperanza Church. The final part of the coded message tells us à midi, pomme bleue. And in the context of our story, the bunch of grapes represents the body of Christ, and the wine from the crushed grapes is what represents the blood of Christ in the Mass. And à midi in this particular context means to the ancient meridian, the rose line.
A straight line, drawn from the church to the meridian, passes through a mountain called Château. Andrews and Schellenberger are the first to identify this site. But if something is concealed here, who could have put it there?
Well, one answer would seem to be some sort of secret society or order. And this thought leads to another fascinating possible trail. Many secret orders claim some descent from or connection with the Knights Templar, a religious military order founded by a group of French knights in 1119.
The story of the Templars goes back 900 years to the time of the Crusades and the conquest of Jerusalem. Here, Lincoln believed they found something precious, possibly of great religious value. According to Lincoln, the Templars must have spirited this treasure away and concealed it somewhere in France before they were driven from the Holy Land after their bloody defeat at the hands of the Saracens. It's said that the secret of the Templars almost died with them when the order was violently suppressed by King Philip IV of France in 1307.
At dawn on Friday the 13th of October, 1307, the Templars throughout France were arrested. Although Philippe's objective of total surprise seems to have been achieved, his prime target, the order's wealth, was never found, and what became of the Templars' treasure has remained a mystery. In France, the Templars were tried, and many were put to the torture.
But a handful of Templars are thought to have escaped to this part of France, where initiates preserved the secret through the centuries. Among them were the Counts of Blanchefort, whose castle stands in Rennes-le-Château.
The whole thing about this story is that there is a lot of complementary evidence to support it. And direct support for this is obtained from the gravestones which were in the graveyard at Rennes-le-Château.
This is where the priest Saunière disturbed the grave of the Lady Hautpoul, Countess of Blanchefort. Schellenberger has detected two clues on her gravestone. First, a line drawn between the two crosses bisects the arrow in the middle at 60 degrees. Second, the arrow itself divides the motto, I too in Arc Adia. Could the motto be indicating the chateau at Arc? When they got there, they found that a bearing of 60 degrees, taken from the chateau, passes straight through the rock pinnacle on the mountain of Château.
Bearing should be 240 to true north.
The point of the geometry is to indicate this precise location on the side of Château mountain.
Spot on, we've got 242 magnetic, minus 2 degrees magnetic deviation, we're right on.
Geometry is concealed because this obviously is a secret of great importance, and it is not a secret to be revealed to the uninitiated.
Many people have been trying to work out what all these clues actually mean. They've been trying to find a secret location, a treasure, whatever might be there. But we have finally done this, and we're absolutely sure that this is the right place.
We have 3 separate sources of information which mark the precise location as being at the base of those rocks. Now, Saunier was probably the first person to stumble on this secret for a very long time.
When Saunier understood what was hidden in the mountain, he tried to destroy the evidence on the tombstone.
The story is that Saunier, having realized the significance of these stones, actually then defaced them, and he either struck off the inscription or he smashed them up.
Saunier smashed the tombstone to preserve the supposed secret of the Templars. And this was the secret. Christ did not die on the cross or rise from the dead. Instead, the Templars removed his body from the Holy Land and concealed it somewhere near Rennes-le-Château. This is what Andrews and Schellenberger believe, and that is why they have called their book The Tomb of God. Timewatch set out to check the basic facts of that story.
Well, Saunier holds great significance in our story. His hand has touched the major evidence which indicate the location. The parchments, which give the geometry, which leads to the location, the gravestones, the coded message, of course, which comes in through the parchments, and even more significantly, the geometry we discovered in the paintings.
What's the hard evidence that he obtained the 3 paintings in Paris?
There is no hard evidence that he obtained the 3 paintings. This is a factor that was written up in a book that came out in the 1980s.
There should be records in the Louvre to show that these paintings were ordered in the 1890s.
Well, possibly. I don't know how good the records are in the Louvre, but we haven't investigated that.
In fact, the Louvre does keep records of reproductions it has sold, and these show that the museum sold no copies of the Poussin until 1901, 10 years too late.
What's the hard evidence that he went to Paris?
There is no hard evidence that he went to Paris, apart from the recent discovery in 1994 that he celebrated Mass for 5 days in Paris in March of 1892.
Where's that recorded?
That apparently is recorded in the Register of Masses at Saint-Sulpice in Paris.
Have you checked that?
We have not checked that.
In fact, there's no evidence that Saunier ever visited Saint-Sulpice or celebrated Mass there, according to a letter from the seminary's archivist. Yet Saunier's trip to Paris is what ties him to the all-important painting by Poussin. What's more, most art historians reject the whole idea of occult geometry in Poussin's paintings.
Is there any evidence that Poussin or his contemporaries actually used mathematics or geometry to compose their painting?
Yeah, if we look at a picture like the Arcadian Shepherds by Poussin, it's easy to find what you're looking for in terms of geometry. I think the really important point from the standpoint of a historian like myself is that we have hundreds and hundreds of drawings by Poussin, thousands and thousands, including his contemporaries. Now, not in one of those is there any evidence of a geometrical armature of angles of precise proportions being laid down, either at the deeper level or at the top level. It's not there.
Evidence about the tombstone is not there either.
What exactly does Saunier's diary say about the tombstone? How does he describe it?
He describes it as a tomb, simply as a tomb, discovered a tomb.
Does he say whose tomb?
No, he doesn't say whose tomb.
Does he say what it looked like?
No, he doesn't describe the tomb as such.
There are illustrations which purport to be of those stones in a book by a chap called Stublein.
Better known as a pioneer weatherman, Stublein's booklet on engraved stones is central to Schellenberger's theory. because one of Stubbline's sketches records the Blanchefort tombstone with the motto, "I too in Arcadia," and the arrow dividing its middle. This puzzled the popular historian Pierre Jarnac when he first read about the lost gold of Rennes-le-Château.
I bought this book about 30 years ago because I'm interested in treasure stories. Certain references in the index caught my eye, like Eugene Stubbline's engraved stones of the Languedoc. I then consulted other works to see if Eugene Stubline had published anything else. And I found a copy of A Trip to Thermal Establishments.
This region of France is dotted with small spa towns, and what Stubline had written was a guide to them.
What struck me when I compared the booklet on engraved stones were the signatures. In thermal establishments, Stubline's signature is completely different. This entire booklet on engraved stones by Eugene Stubline is a complete forgery.
It's possible that the illustration of the tombstone is a complete fabrication.
That doesn't worry you?
It doesn't in the context that it actually supports the location which we've found independently by other means.
Schellenberger and Andrews don't think the evidence of forgery discredits their theory, because they believe the forgers themselves are initiates, privy to the secret of a 1,000-year conspiracy that started with the Templars. Henry Lincoln, among others, has suggested that modern Freemasons preserved the Templars' secret, but historians of Freemasonry see no evidence for this.
I had a meeting with Henry Lincoln and his partners. They were interested in following up possible links between the Knights Templar, Freemasonry, and what had been going on at Rennes-le-Château, and I can't see a connection at all. They were destroyed in the 14th century, and the first evidence that we have for Freemasonry doesn't come until the early 1600s, an enormous gap.
But could I find a connection, a link with the Order of Knights Templar? And could I begin to identify this shadowy but powerful organization? And then I found a document. Here at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, there is an obscure little book of great interest to searchers for the truth of Rennes-le-Château. When I first saw this document, I was by no means inclined to regard it as authoritative, nor even reliable as evidence. And this list of names is of the alleged Grand Masters of that order, an order which this document claims was founded by the Knights Templars themselves. Victor Hugo, Jean Cocteau, Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton. Some of these names are so illustrious that the list seemed just the sort of grandiose pedigree that would be created for itself by a lunatic fringe body of eccentrics playing at secret societies. But it's all too easy to make assumptions and not to keep an open mind.
What convinced Lincoln was the evidence of the parchments.
Certainly Zion seems to be emphasized as we examine them. Here it is simply reversed. And here, the odd breaking of words at the ends of lines spells it out again. Obviously, the word has some significance.
The Priory of Sion was a secretive organization. There is a lot of debate over whether they were an independent organization or a secret organization which split from the Templars. Be that as it may, there are charters and documents which show its existence.
In fact, those charters and documents record an abbey of Zion, but never a priory.
Do those charters recall it Priory of Sion or something else?
They call it Priory of Zion, and it was then changed in 1188 to the Order of the Rose Cross and Veritas.
Are you sure that it wasn't called the Abbey of Zion?
Yes, sorry, yes, you're right. I think it was called the Abbey of Zion.
There's no evidence for a Priory of Zion until the 1950s. To find it, you go to the little town of Saint-Julien. Under French law, every new club or association must register itself with the authorities. And that's why there's a dossier here showing that a Priory of Sion filed the proper forms in 1956. According to a founding member, this eccentric association took its name not from Jerusalem, but from a nearby mountain. The dossier also notes that the Priory's self-styled Grand Master, Pierre Plantard, who is central to this story, has done time in jail. Jean-Luc Chaumet has compiled his own file on Pierre Plantard. It contains police reports which show that before the war he had formed a phony order of chivalry, an order to which Jews and Masons were not welcome. During the war, Plantard published a bizarre newsletter which warned Hitler to beware of plots by Freemasons. After the war, when the French Republic was restored, Plantard claimed that he had really been a member of the resistance with the nom de guerre Pierre de France.
Just after the war, he published a handout claiming that he was part of the resistance. What he got was a letter addressed to all the French by General de Gaulle, thanking them for their courage during the war. That's all. 25 million Frenchmen received the same letter.
At some point in the early 60s, Pierre Plantard began to take an interest in the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. By now, he claimed to have royal blood in his veins. Plantard was accompanied by a real aristocrat, the dissolute and disinherited Marquis de Chérizy. Together, they set out to write a book and make money from the mystery.
They were very different. De Chérizy is now dead. He was an actor whose stage name was Lamadé. He was a very cultured man with a brilliant university degree. Unfortunately, he led a life on the tiles, as we say in France. Plantard reminds me of a big nocturnal bird. Very gloomy, very tall, very skinny. He's not that cultured. In fact, he's quite ignorant. But Plantard has a talent, a flair for symbolism. He finds symbols like some people find mushrooms.
Unable to find a publisher, Plantard and de Chérizy invited de Sède to rewrite their book and share in its profits. They also told him about the secret dossier, where de Sède found a genealogy of the Merovingian kings, proving that Pierre Plantard descended from Dagobert II and was heir to the throne of France. The secret dossier convinced de Sède, and it convinced Henry Lincoln.
And my researchers had uncovered a priory document of genealogies, tracing a descent from the Merovingians and leading to a man called Pierre Plantard de Saint-Clair, in whose veins it seemed now ran the blood of the long-forgotten Dagobert II.
Jean-Luc Chaumet helped the BBC set up its interview with Plantard in this very room over his mother's tiny art gallery.
This is the place where the BBC television has done the interview for Rennes-le-Château. Plantard was there, Henry Lincoln was there, and Roy Davis and all the team on this place.
According to Chaumet, Henry Lincoln was convinced that he was about to interview the man he called Le Roi Perdu, the Lost King. As for Plantard, he played his part to perfection.
After some natural hesitation, he at last agreed to talk about his place in this story. Monsieur Plantard, can you tell us whether the Priory of Sion still exists today?
At this moment, Zion still exists. One of its more recent members, one of its last Grand Masters, was Jean Cocteau. Everyone knows this.
Monsieur Plantard, over the centuries you have, how shall I put it, you have supported the Priory of Sion.
We have supported Zion, and Zion has supported us.
We? Who are we?
We? I'm speaking of the Merovingian line, for our line is descended from Dagobert II. The Merovingians, it was they who made France. Without them there would be no France.
In fact, Plantard's royal lineage rests on another forgery. His name has been inserted into a genealogy copied word for word from a popular history magazine. Plantard's real ancestor was a 16th century peasant who grew walnuts.
De nombreuses enquêtes ont été faites, y compris par mes...
Several of us investigated this, including me, and what we all noticed was that the secret dossiers must have been the work of either Plantard or de Chérisey, because the deposit slip from the copyright registration at the library enabled us to tell who had deposited the booklets.
De Sède's book enjoyed success, but he, Plantard, and de Chérisey fell out over money. Lawyers exchanged letters, and ugly accusations were aired.
After their quarrel, Pierre Plantard made it known that the parchments published in de Sède's book were fakes.
En 1971, je recevais une lettre de Philippe de Chérisey.
In 1971, I received a letter from Philippe de Chérisey implying he was the author of the two parchments published by Gérard de Sède.
The parchments are pretty central to your thesis.
Yes.
Have you seen them?
No. We've seen them only in photographic form.
Do you know anyone who has seen them?
No. We've seen, once again, they've only been known to exist on photograph.
Plantard,
Plantard trusted me because I was writing a book about him, and he gave me the original parchments.
Sur lui, il m'a donné les originaux des parchemins.
And here they are,
Que voici,
parchment 2 and parchment 1.
et ceci avec une annotation.
On this one, he's written a note in his own hand.
Il est indiqué, voici l'original de Philippe.
This is the original document faked by Philippe de Chérisey, which Gérard de Sède reproduced in his book, The Gold of Rennes.
L'or de Rennes.
Have you ever seen the two parchments?
No, very few people have.
Has anyone seen the two parchments?
Well, I don't think we know of anybody seeing the two parchments. Henry Lincoln has seen photographs of the parchments, and photographs of the parchments were published in the Messianic Legacy.
Et voici donc le deuxième document.
Here is the second parchment, which has earned thousands in royalties. It is written in Philippe de Chérisey's own hand.
De Philippe de Chérisey. Voici donc un document.
Here is an unpublished manuscript called Stone and Paper. It's written by Philippe de Chérisey.
Et dans ce document qui fait 44 pages,
and this 44-page document describes how the parchments were fabricated, how the ciphers were set, and how they can be decoded.
This is how de Chérisey solves the riddle he himself created. According to him, 681 is not a spot height or the corner of a square. In fact, de Chérisey never mentions occult geometry. He says 681 was the year in which King Dagobert was killed. The shepherdess is not an armchair. De Chérisey says he is alluding to a local legend about a shepherd who fell down a hole and found a crock of gold. Poussin, he says, is not the painter, but a play on words. In French, Poussin means a chicken, and Haute-Poule, the name of the local aristocrat, could be translated as big chicken. The cross is indeed the cross, the one near the railway bridge. But the horse of God, le cheval de Dieu, is another play on words. It's not a bridge.
Cheval de Dieu.
Cheval de Dieu is a double allusion to the cabal of Chérisey. It's phonetic. Cheval Cabal, cabal, cheval.
Blue apples are not grapes or the blood of Christ, but another Masonic in-joke, part of a rambling document full of puns and anagrams by a man who calls himself the prankster.
It explains how it was conceived, how it was made, and then, surprise, surprise, on page 25 we come across the sentence, "This is the signature of the artist."
C'est-à-dire moi,
Me,
Philippe de Cherisay.
Philippe de Cherisay.
There are certain historical problems, of which the Turin Shroud is one, in which there is fantastic fascination with the topic, but a historical vacuum, a lack of solid evidence. And where there's a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum, and historical speculation abhors vacuums, and it all floods in. But what you end up with is almost nothing tangible or solid. You start from a hypothesis, and that is then deemed to be demonstrated more or less by stating the speculation. You then put another speculation on top of that, and you end up with this great tower of hypotheses and speculations. And if you say, where are the rocks underneath this? They're not there. It's like the house on sand. It washes away as soon as you ask really hard questions of it.
We put to Cherisay's claim that he wrote the parchment to Andrews and Schellenberger, who say their book does consider the possibility that the riddle was composed in recent times, but this does not undermine their thesis. They insist the geometry they see in Poussin and elsewhere predates any modern forgery, if forgery is the right word. For if de Cherisay was indeed the author of the riddle, they believe he must himself have been an initiate, a member perhaps of the Priory of Sion, passing on the secret knowledge.
There is something called historical evidence. There is something called the historical method. And if you look around the shelves of bookshops, there's a lot of history being published, and people mistake this kind of history for the real thing. These kind of books do appeal to an enormous audience who believe them to be history, but actually they aren't history. They are a kind of parody of history. Alas, though, I think one has to say that this is the direction history is going today.
10 years of research into the obscure byways of history. 10 years of discoveries and false leads, of excitement and irrelevancies. So much mystery, treasure, ciphers, heresies. So many intangible maybes.
In next Tuesday's Timewatch, memories of the gold rush in northern Canada 100 years ago.
From total devastation to a dream come true.
Mummy, do you think that American aid is a good thing? I've no idea. You better ask your father. I've got far too much to do.
The minister announced today that the British standard of living has improved during 1949.
We could dress up and show off like film stars. Now we'd become somebody.
It was golden. I couldn't have asked for anything more as a child.
People Century catches post-war euphoria. Sunday at 10 to 5 on BBC One.
Comedy in 10 minutes here on BBC Two when Kenneth Williams joins Hancock on The Alpine Holiday, an episode that's been tucked away in the archives since it was broadcast live in the 50s.